50 people have been executed in South Carolina. Joseph Carl Shaw, January 11, 1985, and James Terry Roach, January 10, 1986, both electrocution. Joseph Carl Shaw became the first person executed by South Carolina after the U.S. Supreme Court reinstated the capital punishment in 1976. Shaw grew up in Jefferson County, Kentucky, where he attended St. Edward Catholic Grade School, serving as an altar boy and playing tackle on the football team. He later enrolled at Jeffersontown High School, but dropped out before graduating. He married Karen Nagrich, though the marriage ended quickly, and he subsequently joined the U.S. Army as a military policeman. In 1977, at the age of 22, Shaw, along with two teenage accomplices, 17-year-old James Terry Roach and 16-year-old Ronald Mahaffey, committed a series of murders in Columbia, South Carolina, which ultimately led to Shaw's death sentence. The first victim was Betty Swank, the wife of a fellow serviceman who was essayed and ultimately murdered. The other two victims were Carlotta Hartness, 14, and Thomas Scofield Taylor, 17, a teenage couple. Carlotta Hartness was slain after being essayed several times. Over the course of many days, Shaw was accused of returning to the crime scene to have relations with the body. Shaw, Roach, and Mahaffey, a minor, turned state's evidence against his fellows in exchange for a life sentence, were not put on trial for the essay and murder of Betty Swank, who was shot outside the door of her mobile home after being released from the clutches of Shaw and his accomplices. Taylor and Hartness came from prominent, well-connected families in Columbia. Taylor's uncle served on the Richland County Council. Some observers, including Shaw's accomplice Roach, as reported by the state, suggested that the social standing and influence of the Taylor and Hartness families played a decisive role in ensuring that Shaw and Roach were sentenced to the electric chair. Shaw was executed by electrocution on January 11, 1985, at the Central Correctional Institution in Columbia, South Carolina, at the age of 29. His last meal was pizza and tossed salad. In his final statement, he thanked his family, religious counselors, and lawyers, and apologized to his victims' families. On January 10 the next year, Roach was also executed by electrocution. His last meal consisted of fried shrimp, hush puppies, French fries, tossed salad, cherry cheesecake, and a soft drink. His last words were, "To the family of the victims, my heart is still with you in your sorrow. May you forgive me, just as I know my Lord has done. To my family and friends, there is only 3 words to say: I love you." Mahaffey, who was 16 years old when the crime occurred in 1977, was sentenced to life in prison. He died behind bars at 41 years old. Ronald Raymond Woomer, April 27, 1990, electrocution. Woomer received a death sentence for one of multiple murders he committed in February 1979. On February 20, he and Gene Scarr traveled from West Virginia to South Carolina, specifically to commit robbery and murder. On February 22, they went to John Turner's home in Colton County, stealing a coin collection and clothing. Woomer shot Turner in the head, killing him. Later that day, they carried out another robbery at a Georgetown County residence, where Woomer killed a man, a woman, and a young child with multiple shotgun blasts to the head. That same day, they robbed a small grocery store and kidnapped 2 women, Della Sellers and Wanda Summers. The women were taken to a dirt road in Horry County, where both were essayed. Woomer then forced them down the road and fired his shotgun at them. The blast severely damaged Summers' jaw, though she survived and later testified at trial. Believing Summers to be dead, Woomer realized Sellers had only minor injuries and fatally shot her in the head. At trial, Woomer was convicted of Sellers' murder, assault, and battery with intent to kill Summers, first-degree criminal sexual conduct against Summers, and the kidnapping of both women. During a separate sentencing proceeding, the jury recommended a death sentence for Woomer. His last words were, "I'm sorry. I claim Jesus Christ as my Savior. I only wish everyone could feel the love I feel for him." There is no publicly available record of what Woomer requested or received for his last meal. Accounts of his final day describe him receiving visits from family and speaking with a reporter, but do not mention his last meal. Donald Henry Gaskins, September 6, 1991, electrocution. Gaskins was responsible for stabbing, shooting, drowning, and poisoning more than a dozen people. Before his conviction for murder, he already had a long record of criminal activity, which had resulted in prison sentences for assault, burglary, and essay. His last arrest involved contributing to the delinquency of a minor, 13-year-old Kim Gelkin, who had gone missing in September 1975. During the investigation into the girl's disappearance, police discovered 8 bodies buried in shallow graves near Gaskin's home in Prospect, South Carolina. In May 1976, a Florence County jury took just 47 minutes to find Gaskins guilty of murdering one of these 8 victims, Dennis Bellamy, and sentenced him to death by electric chair. That sentence was later overturned by the South Carolina Supreme Court in February 1978. Rather than face a new trial, Gaskins pleaded guilty to the murders of Bellamy and 8 other friends and associates, along with a burglary charge. For these crimes, he was given 10 concurrent life sentences, all to be served at Central Correctional Institution Prison in Columbia, South Carolina. While serving this sentence, Gaskins murdered Rudolph Tyner, a fellow inmate on death row, using C4 explosive. After his conviction for Tyner's murder, he received his second death sentence, which was carried out in September of 1991. Shortly before his execution, Gaskins claimed that he had killed 110 people. However, with few exceptions, these statements have been discredited by law enforcement and journalists who alleged that he was seeking notoriety. In a sworn testimony as part of a plea agreement to avoid trial for the murder of John Henry Knight, Gaskins was confirmed to have killed 13 people between 1970 and 1975. Overall, of the 15 people he murdered during his lifetime, 10 were under the age of 25 and 6 were teenagers. Gaskins was executed in the early morning hours of September 6, 1991 at 1:10 a.m. in South Carolina's electric chair. Just hours before his scheduled execution, he had attempted to take his own life by slitting his wrists, but prison officials managed to save him so the sentence could proceed as planned. When asked if he had any final words, Gaskins simply said, "I'll let my lawyers talk for me. I'm ready to go." Gaskins requested a pizza with everything for his last meal. Sylvester Lewis Adams, August 18, 1995, lethal injection. Adams forced his way into the home of 16-year-old Brian Chambers with the intent to steal. When he came up empty-handed, he kidnapped Chambers and attempted to extort money from his family. However, Chambers' mother did not grasp the severity of the situation during Adams' call and dismissed his demands. Angered and frustrated, Adams strangled Brian to death using a cord. Adams was the first inmate to be executed by lethal injection in South Carolina. During his final hours, he was visited by family and friends as well as his spiritual advisor. The former commander of the execution team, Jim Harvey, later recalled comforting Adams before the execution. He did not make a final statement, and there are no records of his final meal. Robert South, May 31, 1996, lethal injection. South was found guilty of killing West Columbia police officer Daniel Cockburn on April 12, 1983. The 29-year-old officer was seated in his patrol car writing a traffic citation when South fired at him from a passing pickup truck. Cockburn, who had only been with the department for 4 days, was survived by his wife, daughter, 2 sons, father, brother, and sister. South did not give a final statement from the death chamber, but spoke privately with his attorney, telling him, "I'll see you when I see you." South also indicated that he had prepared a letter with his final statement to be sent to a newspaper reporter. No widely publicized records detail Robert South's last meal request. Accounts of his final day describe visits from family and friends, but do not mention his last meal. Fred Cornorens, July 19, 1996, lethal injection. Cornorens, 47, was executed for a series of murders which he later claimed were motivated by the breakup of his marriage. He first shot his ex-wife, 35-year-old Patty Jo Avant, in the chest. As she fled to her father's nearby mobile home, Cornorens stabbed her 69-year-old father, Harry Wilkerson, to death. He then pursued Patty outside and fatally stabbed her. Additionally, her stepson, Jason, was killed after having his hands and feet bound with packing tape. There are no records of Cornorens' last meal. In a final written statement, he expressed his beliefs and acknowledged his fate, but continued to maintain his emotional distress. He said he did not realize how sick he was until after the crime, claiming the breakdown of his marriage was more than he could handle. He added, "Whether God is ready for me to come home or whether he wants me to continue serving him here, I am in his hands. My trust and faith is in Jesus Christ." Michael Ryan Torrance, September 6, 1996, lethal injection. Torrance became involved in a series of violent acts after his sister-in-law, who worked as a stripper, claimed that she had been harassed by two men, 41-year-old Dennis Lawless and 31-year-old Charles Bush. She complained to her husband, who was Torrance's brother, and together they recruited Torrance to take revenge. The sister-in-law lured Bush to the family home, and when Bush arrived, he was beaten with a tire iron and strangled to death with a dog leash by Torrance and the couple. Afterwards, the trio went to the motel room where Lawless was staying. They sneaked in while he was asleep and stabbed him 20 times. Both Bush and Lawless were robbed after they were killed. A few months later, Torrance picked up Cynthia Williams, a 20-year-old sex worker, and shot her dead during an argument. Torrance had previous convictions, though the available sources do not provide details about them. Michael Torrance's last words were read by his lawyer. In a written statement, he acknowledged and understood the impact of his crimes. He expressed hope for closure for the victims' families and said he had accepted God. This contrasted with his earlier interviews where he expressed no remorse. Torrance's request for a last meal from an outside restaurant was denied due to prison regulations. He was instead served shrimp with cocktail sauce and strawberry shortcake from the prison kitchen. Larry Gene Bell, October 4, 1996, electrocution. Larry Gene Bell was born in Ralph, Alabama, and grew up with three sisters and one brother. The family moved frequently, and Bell attended Eau Claire High School in Columbia, South Carolina, from 1965 to 1967. Eventually, the family relocated to Mississippi, where Bell completed high school and received training as an electrician. He later returned to Columbia, South Carolina, married, and had one son. In 1970, Bell joined the Marines, but he was discharged the same year after sustaining a knee injury from accidentally shooting himself while cleaning a gun. The following year, he briefly worked as a prison guard for the Department of Corrections in Columbia, staying on the job for only 1 month. In 1972, Bell and his family moved to Rock Hill, South Carolina, and the couple divorced in 1976. Bell's criminal acts began with the abduction of 17-year-old Sharon Sherry Faye Smith on May 31, 1985. He kidnapped her at gunpoint from the end of her driveway on Platte Springs Road. Her car was discovered running with the door open, and her body was later found in Saluda County, South Carolina. Bell subsequently kidnapped 10-year-old Deborah May Helmick near Old Percival Road in Richland County. He was also a suspect in the 1984 disappearance of Sandy Elaine Cornett in Charlotte, North Carolina, who had been dating one of Bell's co-workers. Larry Gene Bell reportedly claimed he was Jesus Christ, maintaining this belief even up to his execution. He chose to be executed by the electric chair rather than by lethal injection. He believed that being executed by electric chair would allow him to be with his victims sooner. Bell had no last words in the execution chamber, and there are no records of his final meal. Doyle Cecil Lucas, November 15, 1996, lethal injection. Lucas, 41, expressed that he wished to die and felt filled with remorse for the 1983 murders of Bill and Evelyn Rayfield during a burglary. However, in his final statement, Lucas criticized the state, saying it had brought itself down to a level of the people who have themselves killed. Just moments before his execution, through a thick glass window, he told his wife of 6 months that he loved her, while one of the Rayfield's adult sons watched. After killing the couple, Lucas had stuffed a blood-soaked pillowcase with money and costume jewelry and drove away in the Rayfield's car. He was wearing a blood-stained shirt and Bill Rayfield's watch when he was apprehended shortly afterward, after the police spotted the vehicle. Lucas's last meal consisted of fruit cocktail. Frank Middleton Jr., November 22, 1996, lethal injection. While serving a 6-year sentence for stabbing a 13-year-old boy over a dropped dime at a phone booth, Middleton escaped from prison. On the run, he went on to rob, essay, and fatally strangle 2 women, 49-year-old Shirley Mack and 21-year-old Janelle Garner. Garner was killed in the courtyard of a Catholic school, while Mack was murdered while walking home from her night shift as a restaurant cook. Middleton also essayed another woman at a gas station, but she survived the attack. His last words were, "What are you people looking at? I'm going to the promised land." He chose not to have a special last meal. Michael Eugene Elkins, June 13, 1997, lethal injection. Elkins was convicted of the robbery and murder of 59-year-old Patricia Witt of Largo, Florida, on July 9, 1990, after she stopped to help him and another man who pretended to have car trouble along Interstate 95 near the Georgia border. Earlier that night, Witt had met Elkins and Rolf Garner when they assisted her in fixing her overheated car, and she gave them $10 for their help. During the murder, Witt was stabbed 8 times. Elkins was arrested days later after his girlfriend turned him in, having received 3 of Witt's rings from him. Garner, who was acquitted of the murder, testified against Elkins. Elkins chose to waive his court appeals. His attorney noted that he, once slight in build, had gained weight due to spleen and liver problems and was uncomfortable in prison, suggesting that his life would have been cut short anyway. Elkins' last meal consisted of fried shrimp, a roast beef sandwich, and clam chowder. He had no last words. Earl Matthews Jr., November 7, 1997, lethal injection. On the evening of October 29, 1984, 16-year-old Lucia Aymar and her boyfriend Eric Byrne had purchased dinner from a drive-thru restaurant in Charleston, South Carolina. While they were eating in a nearby parking lot, Matthews approached the driver's side where Byrne was seated. He brandished a handgun, aimed it at Byrne's head, and demanded money. During the struggle, Matthews struck Byrne in the face, breaking his nose. Byrne found $5 in Aymar's purse and handed it over to Matthews. Matthews then moved to the passenger side, where Aymar sat. She locked the door and tried to roll up the window, but Matthews prevented her from doing so and demanded a ride. When Byrne refused, Matthews shot Aymar in the head and Byrne in the chest. Aymar died from her injuries, while Byrne survived and later testified against Matthews at trial. Earl was just 20 years old and he had no criminal record. He had no last words and no special final meal. John David Arnold Jr., March 6, 1998, and John Herman Platt, July 10, 1998, lethal injection. On April 12, 1978, Betty Gardner, 33, was standing by the roadside near Beaufort, South Carolina, waiting for a lift to St. Helena Island, where she planned to work on her father's farm. A green Pontiac bearing South Carolina plates pulled over, and 4 people climbed out. John Arnold, his cousin John Platt, Cindy Sheets, and Carol Ullman. Sheets was Platt's 17-year-old girlfriend, and Ullman was an 11-year-old runaway. Arnold would later be charged with statutory rape in connection with Ullman. Also in the car were 2 dogs. The group told Gardner they were heading to the beach and had been staying with a Marine and his wife, whose car they were using. Gardner accepted their offer of a ride and got in. Unbeknownst to her, Arnold was an escapee, wanted on charges for failing to return from a weekend furlough from a pre-release facility at the State Correctional Institution Huntingdon in Pennsylvania. A short time after picking Gardner up, the group dropped her off at the end of a dirt lane. The car then returned to where she stood, and the offenders picked her up again, claiming they would drop her close to her destination. While Gardner remained inside the vehicle, Sheets began to assault her, striking her repeatedly with her fists. They then drove her to a secluded spot in the woods on St. Helena Island, and there Arnold and Platt forced Gardner to remove her clothing. Arnold told her she would not be leaving and kicked her in the side. The 2 men continued to assault her, threatening to kill her if she did not obey. Over the course of the attack, Gardner was forced to perform oral on Arnold, Platt, and Sheets. She was repeatedly whipped with a belt, which was later wrapped around her neck. Arnold and Platt attempted to strangle her with that belt while dragging her along the ground. Platt stomped on her neck multiple times and repeatedly stabbed her chest with a pocket knife. At one point, Arnold tore clothing into strips to fashion a rope, intending to hang Gardner from a tree, but abandoned that plan after deciding the makeshift rope would not hold her weight. Platt then ordered Sheets to cut Gardner's throat with a broken soda bottle. When that effort failed, Arnold, assisted by the young runaway Carol Ullman, continued to strangle Gardner until she died. Sheets later testified that she had been coerced into participating, saying Platt threatened her with retaliation if she disclosed the plot. "If you ever open your mouth about what's going to happen, I'm going to get you. If I don't get you, I'll get your family." After the murder, Arnold carved the letters KKK into Gardner's body, reportedly as an attempt to mislead investigators and suggest that the killing was a hate crime carried out by the Ku Klux Klan. On March 6, 1998, John Arnold, 42, was executed by lethal injection at Broad River Correctional Institution in Columbia. He was pronounced dead at 6:15 p.m. Arnold maintained his innocence until the very end, delivering a final statement. The judicial system has had my neck under its heel. I leave this world with my identity fully intact, my dignity untouched, my spirit sound and whole. Arnold's last meal was a sub sandwich, tossed salad, french fries, and a vanilla milkshake. On July 10, 1998, John Platt, 43, was executed by lethal injection at the same institution. He was pronounced dead at 6:22 p.m. In his final handwritten statement, Platt denied killing Garner. During his time on death row, he became a Christian and recited Bible verses in the execution chamber. Additionally, while incarcerated, Platt was adopted by a 70-year-old woman. There are no records of his final meal. Sammy Roberts, September 25, 1998, lethal injection. Roberts, 40, was sentenced to death for his role in the murders of Bill Spain, Kenneth Krause, and Louis Cackley. On June 19, 1980, the three men were robbed and then driven to wooded areas where they were shot to death. Their bodies were discovered 3 days later. Roberts was arrested later that year along with Wesley Copeland and Danny Ray Cocker. Cocker testified against Roberts and Copeland in exchange for immunity, stating that Copeland had shot Spain and Krause, while Roberts repeatedly stabbed Krause to ensure he was dead and later shot Cackley in the back 4 times as he tried to escape. The robberies yielded approximately $1,500. Copeland died of natural causes on death row in 1986. Roberts did not have a special last meal. He was served a standard prison tray. He also did not make a final statement. Larry Gilbert, December 4, 1998, and J.D. Gleaton, December 4, 1998, both lethal injection. Two half-brothers, Larry Gilbert, 43, and J.D. Gleaton, 53, were executed by lethal injection for the murder of gas station owner Ralph Studmeyer during a robbery. On July 12, 1977, both men, reportedly under the influence of drugs, entered the gas station intending to rob it. During the crime, Gleaton stabbed the owner 5 times, including a fatal wound to the heart, while Gilbert shot him. The robbery was witnessed by the victim's son, who lived across the street. He reportedly saw both Gleaton and Gilbert fleeing the station while his father, mortally wounded, staggered outside and pointed at the getaway car. His son attempted to help him, but approximately 45 minutes later, the man died at the scene. An autopsy later confirmed that he had sustained 1 superficial gunshot wound to the chest, 2 superficial slash wounds to the wrists, and 5 stab wounds to the torso. The pathologist determined that one of the stab wounds had penetrated the heart. Gilbert's last meal was fish, cornbread, salad, french fries, pecan pie, and tea. He had no last words. Gleaton's last meal consisted of a cinnamon roll, banana pudding, cheese, and orange juice. Before his execution, Gleaton released a final statement expressing remorse for his actions and a desire for the victim's family to have peace. He also maintained that he and Gilbert had turned their lives over to God while on death row. Louis Joe Truesdale Jr., December 11, 1998, lethal injection. Truesdale abducted 18-year-old Rebecca Udy from a grocery store. He then essayed her and shot her to death, leaving her body inside her car. Truesdale had previously been involved in a relationship with Udy, a fact he later used to claim in court that she had gone with him voluntarily and that he did not kidnap her. No records detailing his final meal have been publicized. Truesdale spent his final hours with his sister, brother-in-law, and 2 spiritual advisors. He didn't have any last words. Andrew Laverne Smith, December 18, 1998, lethal injection. Between 1980 and 1983, Smith committed a series of violent crimes along Interstate 85 in South Carolina, including 4 murders and 1 attempted murder. He received the death penalty for his final 2 killings. His first known serious offense occurred on February 24, 1980, when a female convenience store clerk was abducted and essayed at gunpoint before being thrown off an overpass along the interstate. Remarkably, she survived the attack. On July 28, 1981, at approximately 3:30 a.m., Henry Poor entered the Phillips 66 gas station along Interstate 85 in Anderson after hearing someone shouting. Behind the counter, he found 22-year-old cashier David Evan Craig of Sandy Springs lying on the floor. Craig, who had been shot, was still conscious but in shock and unable to provide details about the shooter. He was rushed to Inmate Health Medical Center where he succumbed to his injuries a few hours later. The initial investigation yielded very few clues or suspects. Nearly a year later, on June 5, 1982, 22-year-old Nirad J. Patel of Spartanburg was found stabbed to death at the Southerner Hotel in Anderson, further adding to the string of violent acts attributed to Smith. On May 28, 1983, neighbors of 85-year-old Christy Johnson and his 80-year-old wife Corey visited their home in Pendleton after repeated phone calls went unanswered. Upon entering, they discovered the elderly couple had been brutally murdered. Christy had sustained 26 stab wounds, while Corey had 18. The weapon used was a 6-inch knife found in the kitchen. The couple's car was missing from their home and was later recovered approximately 2 miles away along Hurricane Creek Road. Smith's last words were, "Let's do it." His last meal was bacon and eggs, lemonade, and ice cream. Ronnie Howard, January 8, 1999, lethal injection. Howard and another man, Dana Weldon, abducted Chin Tin Nguyen Le, a 34-year-old Vietnamese refugee and mother of 3, during an attempted car theft. They intentionally bumped her car at a stop sign, and when the woman stepped out, they held her at gunpoint. Howard placed a plastic bag over her head while Weldon repeatedly punched her in the stomach, causing her to suffocate, according to trial records. Several weeks later, Le's naked body was discovered under kudzu vines in rural Greenville County, too decomposed for authorities to determine the exact cause of death. Her car was located 100 miles away in Columbia. Howard and Weldon were apprehended nearly 3 months later in Asheville, North Carolina, after robbing a Pizza Hut. At the time, Howard was on parole for a prior bank robbery. Howard confessed not only to this murder, but also admitted involvement in a similar killing. Both men were prosecuted together and convicted. In September 1986, Howard, 40 years old, was sentenced to death for Le's murder while also receiving a life sentence for the other killing. Weldon, 39, received a death sentence as well, but his sentence was overturned and he got life in prison instead. Howard additionally admitted to participating in 72 armed robberies, mostly targeting Pizza Hut and Taco Bell restaurants. Howard did not make a final verbal statement and did not have a special last meal. Joseph Ernest Atkins, January 22, 1999, lethal injection. Atkins, a Vietnam War veteran and serial killer, murdered 3 people in South Carolina over the course of his life. His first known killing was of his half-brother in 1969, for which he received a life sentence. After his adoptive father petitioned for his release, Atkins was granted parole in 1980. 5 years later, in 1985, he murdered a 13-year-old neighbor girl as well as his adoptive father. He was convicted of these 2 murders, sentenced to death, and ultimately executed in 1999. During his trial, Atkins's lawyers argued unsuccessfully for leniency, claiming that he had been experiencing a flashback from his time in Vietnam when committing the murders. At the time of the killings, Atkins had armed himself with a machete and was wearing military clothes. He had no last words. His last meal was steak, fries, tossed salad, corn on the cob, and chocolate pudding. Leroy Joseph Drayton, November 12, 1999, lethal injection. In February 1984, the body of Rhonda Darlene Smith was discovered near an abandoned coal trestle along the Cooper River. Smith, a mother of a 5-month-old child, was also the sister of former state representative Sandy Wofford, who later became a victims' rights advocate and worked on passing a victims' bill of rights while collaborating with South Carolina Attorney General Charlie Condon. Witnesses reported that on the morning of February 11, 1984, Drayton and Smith arrived at the K gas station where Smith worked. She opened the store and assisted customers, appearing calm and untroubled, as did Drayton. However, prosecutors contended that Drayton later robbed the store and abducted Smith. According to Drayton's statements to police, Smith allegedly stole over $300 and offered it to him. He claimed that she went with him willingly to the coal trestle, where he tripped, causing his pistol to discharge accidentally, fatally striking Smith between the eyes. There are no records of his final meal, and he had no last words. Before we continue, with the holidays coming up, I just wanted to share something special. I've published my very first true crime quiz books on Amazon. They're such a fun gift idea for anyone who loves true crime or serial killer trivia. You can grab the one that interests you most or get all three for less and make it a fun game night with friends or family. It's my first time creating something like this, so your support honestly means so much to me. And if you do get one, I'd be really grateful if you could leave an honest review. It will help me learn and do even better next time. You can find all the links down below in the description. Alright, let's get back to the next case. David Roachville, December 3rd, 1999, and Richard Longworth, April 15, 2005, lethal injection. On the evening of January 7, 1991, Roachville and his friend Richard Longworth were driving around in their minivan when they decided to rob the Westgate Mall Cinema in Spartanburg. After entering the theater, Longworth removed his handgun from a shoulder holster and handed it to Roachville. The two watched the movie briefly before moving to the lobby to carry out their plan of stealing money from the ticket booth. While in the hallway, they encountered 19-year-old Alexander George Hobbs. Longworth knocked Hobbs down, jumped on him, held a hand over his mouth, and dragged him outside through a side exit. Once outside, Longworth pinned Hobbs against a waist-high bar protecting the air conditioning unit, and Roachville shot him in the left side of the head. He then returned the gun to Longworth, who placed it back in his shoulder holster. Trying to re-enter the theater, the front doors were locked. The two motioned to 24-year-old employee James Todd Green, who opened the door for them. Longworth drew his gun, demanded that Green open the safe in the ticket booth, and took several money bags. Green informed them that more bags were in his car, ready for deposit, which they also retrieved. Afterward, Longworth and Roachville forced Green into their minivan. Longworth again handed the gun to Roachville, instructing him to shoot Green if he moved. Driving away, they stopped the vehicle, made Green get out, walk 5 paces, kneel, and stare straight ahead. At that point, Roachville shot Green in the back of the head, killing him. Longworth and Roachville were arrested the day after the murders when Roachville led law enforcement officers to Green's body. Following Longworth's arrest, he gave authorities a detailed statement outlining the crimes he and Roachville had committed. Roachville admitted to killing Green but claimed he had been coerced and feared that Longworth would kill him. Reflecting on the events, he stated, "Basically, my crime was I was no hero that night." Roachville was executed on December 3rd, 1999, while his accomplice, Richard Longworth, faced the same fate more than 5 years later on April 15, 2005. David Roachville's last meal was a beef and cheese pizza and a root beer. He had no last words. Longworth's last meal consisted of a hamburger, French fries, and a chocolate milkshake. In his final written statement, which was read by his lawyer, Longworth apologized to his victims' families and expressed remorse for his actions. He said he couldn't ask for their forgiveness, knowing it would not be granted. His statement included, "I am morally and legally responsible for what happened. I hope they also know how deeply, truly sorry I am for what I have done. I hope my death brings them the peace they deserve." Kevin Dean Young, November 3rd, 2000, lethal injection. Young was sentenced to death twice, first in 1989 and again in 1993 for the robbery and murder of 35-year-old Dennis Ray Hepler on August 31, 1988. Hepler, who had just begun his first year as an elementary school principal, was working late that evening. As he was leaving the school, Young and 3 accomplices robbed him. Despite Hepler surrendering his wallet containing $67, Young shot him twice, with the first shot proving fatal. William Bell then shot Hepler in the head while he lay on the ground. At the time of the murder, Young had an extensive criminal history and he was on parole. Bell also received a death sentence for his role in the killing, but in 2017 he was resentenced to life in prison. Young's last words were an expression of his faith and his belief that he had been forgiven by a higher power, but not by man. "If I said I was sorry, few, if any, would believe me, so I am not going to dwell on that issue. I asked God, Allah, to forgive me, not man." There are no records of his final meal. Richard Charles Johnson, May 3rd, 2002, lethal injection. In September 1985, Dan Swanson was driving through North Carolina in his recreational vehicle on his way to Florida when he picked up a hitchhiker named Johnson. The following day, Swanson and Johnson picked up two more hitchhikers, Curtis Harbert and Connie Hess, who also went by the alias Julie Smith while traveling along Interstate 95. The group made several stops along the way before parking the RV along the interstate to rest. As Swanson slept, Johnson fatally shot him. After killing him, Johnson and Harbert wrapped Swanson's body in blankets and sheets, tied it with wire, and concealed the corpse in the RV underneath a mattress. Despite this, the three continued traveling in the RV, with Johnson driving. Johnson had been drinking liquor, and his driving became increasingly erratic and dangerous. Several motorists noticed his reckless operation of the RV, and one truck driver called the authorities to report the situation. When Trooper Smalls stopped the RV to question the occupants, Johnson shot him 6 times, killing him instantly. Johnson's last meal was fried shrimp, fried oysters, French fries, chocolate cake, and iced tea. His last words were, "I love you, I'll see you later." Anthony Green, August 23, 2002, lethal injection. On the afternoon of November 21, 1987, Susan Babbage parked her car in the rear lot of the Charlestown Square shopping mall in Charleston, South Carolina. After finishing her shopping, she returned to her vehicle ready to leave when she was confronted by Green, who approached her with a rifle in hand. Without warning, Green shot Miss Babbage in the head, took her pocketbook, and fled the scene in a separate vehicle. An eyewitness quickly provided a description to the police, who soon located and apprehended Green in the vicinity of the mall. During the arrest, officers recovered the rifle and the victim's checkbook from Green's car. Ultimately, Green gave a statement confessing his involvement in the attack and robbery. He had no last words and no final special meal. Michael Joseph Passaro, September 13, 2002, lethal injection. In the midst of a bitter custody battle, Passaro drove to his estranged wife's condominium in Myrtle Beach and parked the family minivan outside. In a horrifying act of revenge and despair, he doused the interior of the vehicle with gasoline and set it ablaze, with their 2-year-old daughter Maggie still strapped helplessly in her car seat. His plan had been to die alongside her in the fire, but when the van suddenly exploded, Passaro leaped out, surviving the blast. When firefighters arrived at the scene, they desperately asked Passaro if anyone was still inside the burning vehicle, but he refused to answer. Investigators later discovered that Passaro believed he would be reunited in heaven with his deceased first wife and his daughter after the fire. Before the incident, he had written a suicide note expressing his wish that his estranged wife Karen would live in pain for the rest of her life. Passaro ultimately pled guilty to the crime and waived all appeals, accepting full responsibility for the murder of his child. At the time of the execution, Passaro smiled, blew kisses at his family, then told them he loved them and that it was over. He had no final special meal. David Clayton Hill, March 19, 2004, lethal injection. On March 7, 1994, Spencer Guerry, the 37-year-old deputy police chief of Georgetown, South Carolina, stopped a car driven by David Hill in the parking lot of a local car wash. Hill was behind the wheel of a silver Honda Prelude with expired Colorado license plates. He did not have a valid driver's license and had Mary Jane in the vehicle. Officer Guerry took Hill's Colorado ID card and car registration and radioed the information to the dispatcher. As he returned to Hill's car, Hill shot him once through the cheek. Despite the severe injury, Guerry managed to radio for help, and Hill's ID card and car registration were later found in the officer's shirt pocket. After the shooting, Hill attempted to manipulate and destroy evidence before eventually calling the police, leading to his arrest. At trial, Hill claimed that someone had been hiding in the back seat and he was actually the shooter. However, multiple witnesses testified that Hill had been the only person in the Honda at the time of the shooting, undermining his defense. For his final meal, all he asked for was a bottle of Dom Perignon champagne, but since that is contraband, his request was denied. He had no last words. Jerry Bridwell McQuee, April 16, 2004, lethal injection. McQuee, seeking money to buy drugs, entered a convenience store in rural Aiken County. He took the clerk, John Perry, to the back of the store and shot him twice in the head before stealing $350 from the cash register. A week later, he also shot and killed his boss. His co-defendant, George Scott, who participated in both shootings and fired the weapon in the second killing, received a life sentence for both murders as part of a plea agreement and testified against McQuee. McQuee's last meal was steak, jumbo fried shrimp, broccoli with cheese, French fries, lemon meringue pie, and iced tea. His last statement was read by his lawyer. I only wished that things could have been different. I would give anything if only that could have been the case. Jason Scott Byram, April 23, 2004, lethal injection. Julie Johnson, an elementary school teacher with 12 years of experience working with emotionally handicapped children, was attacked in the early hours of May 23, 1993. She was resting on her living room couch while her husband and 3 children slept upstairs when Byram broke into her home through the kitchen window. He initially stole her purse and van, then returned hours later to take a TV and VCR. Upon his return, he confronted Johnson, stabbing her repeatedly with a kitchen butcher knife. Despite her injuries, Johnson managed to make it to the front yard where her husband and the responding police officer heard her final words. She died en route to the hospital. When arrested later that afternoon, Byram admitted to entering Johnson's home and stabbing her to keep her quiet, but falsely claimed that an accomplice named Jim had inflicted the fatal wounds. Investigators found Byram's fingerprint at the scene, and an eyewitness saw him driving a van with blood on his shirt, but he didn't have any passengers. No evidence of an accomplice was ever discovered, and the jury ultimately concluded that he acted alone. Byram's last meal was steak, mashed potatoes, green beans, collard greens, cornbread, banana pudding, cherry cheesecake, apple cobbler, and sweet iced tea. Byram's attorney read his last statement. While I maintain my innocence, I do want to express my condolences to the family of Mrs. Johnson, and I fully understand they only seek justice for their daughter. In the statement, Byram also expressed his appreciation to the SC Department of Corrections concerning his treatment. It concluded with a reading of John 3:16 and the words, I believe. James Neal Tucker, May 28, 2004, electrocution. On the afternoon of June 25, 1992, Rosa Lee Dolly Oakley was in her yard when Tucker pulled his car into her driveway. He spoke with her long enough to ensure that she was alone before drawing a gun and forcing her into the house and subsequently into her bedroom. While this was happening, Joe Black and James Howard drove up looking for her husband and rang the doorbell. Tucker followed Oakley out into the driveway as she began screaming. He pulled her back from the retreating car, dragged her into the house, took $14 from her purse, and shot her twice in the head at close range. Tucker testified that he shot her the first time when she attempted to grab the gun and fired the second shot to put her out of her misery. Following these murders, Tucker went on the run from police and committed further crimes. Between June 26 and 27, 1992, he broke into the Christian Fellowship Church. From June 27 through June 29, he broke into Kenneth Parker's mobile home. Tucker then hitchhiked under trucks until he arrived in Calhoun County, where he broke into Shannon Mellon's house. Armed with a gun, he taped her wrists and ankles behind her back and left her on her bed while he searched for items to steal. Tucker then re-entered the bedroom and shot her once in the head, followed by 2 more shots when she continued to struggle. He wrapped her body in a sheet and dragged it into the woods behind the house, where it was discovered a week later. Tucker stole Shannon's car and was eventually apprehended in Maggie Valley a week later, providing a detailed confession to law enforcement. Tucker was convicted and sentenced to death for each of these murders. Tucker had a long and violent criminal history. At age 17, he had been sent to adult prison in Utah for essaying an 8-year-old girl and an 83-year-old woman. While serving his sentence between 1974 and 1991, he escaped 3 separate times. While on death row, Tucker attempted to escape by threatening a guard with a safety razor blade that had been melted into a toothbrush, but he was recaptured within minutes. Tucker's last meal was pizza, Mountain Dew, and 2 bacon, lettuce, and tomato sandwiches. Tucker's attorney read his final statement. To everyone, I have thought of a million things to say, but they can all be summed up like this. To those I have harmed, my abject apologies and regrets. I am ashamed. To those who must remain and deal with this insane world, my condolences. But be of good cheer. Christ has overcome the world. I know that my Redeemer lives. I am leaving this world with a cheerful attitude. Hallelujah. Hastings Arthur Wise, November 4, 2005, lethal injection. Wise was a towering figure, standing 6'4" and weighing over 250 pounds, a former convict who had spent nearly 15 years trying to straighten out his life. Despite this, he appeared to relish intimidating those around him by recounting his past, including time spent in prison for breaking into a house and robbing a bank. For 4 years, he had been employed at the Aiken lawnmower ignition plant, but his tenure ended after a violent confrontation with a supervisor, which led to his termination. Weeks after being fired, Wise returned to the plant seeking revenge. Security guard Stanley Vance observed Wise arrive in his car during the 3 p.m. shift change. Armed with a semi-automatic gun, Wise fired a shot into Vance's chest, severed the phone lines in the guard shack, and casually told the guard, "I got things to do." Moving through a side door, Wise went straight to the personnel office, where he shot 56-year-old Charles Griffith twice in the back. Griffith had been the one to terminate Wise 2 months earlier. From there, Wise advanced to the tool and die area, a section where he had hoped to be employed. He began firing his gun at anyone in his path, killing 30-year-old David Moore and 31-year-old Leonard Filio, and wounding 2 additional workers. Chaos erupted as panicked employees scrambled to escape the gunfire. Wise continued his path of violence, locating 27-year-old Cheryl Wood, who had secured the quality control position he coveted. He shot her in the back and leg before delivering a fatal shot to her head. After this, Wise's movements became erratic. He fired several more rounds, though no additional fatalities occurred. Investigators later discovered 4 empty magazines, each capable of holding 8 bullets. Following the shootings, Wise attempted to end his own life by drinking insecticide inside the plant, but the act only left him ill rather than dead. During his trial, Wise refused to allow his attorneys to call any witnesses who might plead for mercy on his behalf, and he has consistently rejected all attempts at appeal since being placed on death row. His last meal was lobster tail, French fries, coleslaw, banana pudding, and milk. He didn't have any last words. Sean Paul Humphreys, December 2, 2005, lethal injection. Humphreys and his accomplice, Eddie Blackwell, spent much of the day drinking beer together before deciding to enter the Max Saver convenience store with the intent of committing a robbery. Inside the store, Dickie Smith, the owner, politely asked Humphreys whether he wanted anything. Humphreys, brandishing a gun that he had stolen the previous night, replied that he wanted money. Evidence later suggested that Dickie may have reached under the counter to retrieve a gun. As Smith made this movement, Humphreys fired a shot in his direction and fled from the store. Tragically, the bullet struck Dickie Smith in the head, killing him instantly. Blackwell, who had slumped to the ground during the incident, was apprehended at the scene. Humphreys was captured later the same day and immediately confessed to the crime. Both men were tried for their roles in the murder, with Blackwell ultimately convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment, while Humphreys faced the full consequences of his actions. His last meal was a McDonald's hamburger, French fries, broccoli and cheese, oat cereal, and a Dr. Pepper. During his execution, Humphreys looked toward the victim's sisters, Katie Smith Carpenter and Carol Smith Cooley, and mouthed, "I'm sorry." Carpenter nodded in response. It appeared that a tear rolled down Humphrey's cheek after the exchange. William Ernest Downs Jr., July 14, 2006, lethal injection. 6-year-old Keenan O'Malley went bike riding near Riverview Park while his mother cooked dinner inside her apartment. He never came back home. His body was found the next day just outside the park after an extensive search. Downs had only been in Augusta for 3 months, having moved from Albany, Georgia, when he learned he had a son in the area. He saw Keenan riding a bike along a dirt path. He approached the 6-year-old boy and asked his name, then threw him to the ground and essayed him. Then he killed him by strangling him. Downs confessed and pled guilty, saying he deserved to die for his crime. He was also found guilty in 2005 of kidnapping, essaying, and murdering a 10-year-old boy in Augusta back in 1991. Because he was already sentenced to death in South Carolina, Georgia gave him 2 consecutive life sentences plus 10 years. Downs essayed the little boys after they had already passed as well. His last meal was salted cashew nuts, instant French roast coffee, chocolate chip cookie dough, Moose Tracks ice cream, and 3 Mr. Goodbar candy bars. He didn't have any last words. Calvin Alfonso Schuler, June 22, 2007, lethal injection. Schuler had previously been employed by Anderson Armored Car Service and had briefly worked alongside his eventual victims, James J.B. Brooks, James Amick, and Sherman Crozier. Patiently and quietly, Schuler waited beneath a house near Harleyville for the armored car to make its routine stop at a bank. When the truck arrived, he emerged from under the house, pointed a gun at the driver, and shouted for him to get out. Inside the armored car, Brooks attempted to defend himself with only a 5-shot revolver, facing Schuller's SKS assault rifle. Investigators noted that Brooks fired every round in his weapon before succumbing to his injuries. After the ensuing gun battle and robbery attempt, Schuller abandoned the armored car on a back road, having failed to seize any money, most of it destroyed by gunfire or soaked in blood. Brooks' body was later found inside the vehicle. When questioned by police officers and FBI agents, Schuller confessed to both the robbery and the murder. Following his confession, authorities searched his home and discovered abundant physical evidence, including items bearing Schuller's DNA, which matched blood found inside the armored car. He didn't have any last words. He had a last meal of T-bone steak, well done with A1 steak sauce, baked potato, French fries, grape drink, and chocolate cake. David Mark Hill, June 6, 2008, lethal injection. On September 16, 1996, Hill entered the Aiken County Department of Social Services office in North Augusta with lethal intent, opening fire on his family's caseworker and 2 other employees after he had lost custody of his children. The shootings were fatal, leaving all 3 staff members dead. A day later, Hill was discovered in a wooded area, having attempted to end his own life. He had sustained a gunshot wound that entered through the roof of his mouth and exited the top of his skull. At the time, Hill was married and had 3 young children, a 3-year-old daughter who had become a quadriplegic due to a traffic accident, and twin 2-year-old boys. Social services had been monitoring the family amid concerns about the parents' abuse of prescription drugs. Following the tragedy, the children were removed from the home for their safety. Hill's last meal was meatloaf, corn on the cob, garlic bread, a beef burrito, a Mexican pizza, a taco, cake, ice cream, garden salad with tomatoes and ranch dressing, and Pepsi. His last words were, "I sincerely apologize to the families of Josie Curry, Michael Gregory, and James Riddle. I am very sorry for the pain that my actions caused to them. Hopefully, my decision to have this sentence carried out without delay will help you understand the sincerity of my apology and will provide you with some closure. To those of you who have expressed forgiveness to me, I thank you. For those of you who have been unable or unwilling to forgive me, I pray that today will provide you with the peace you deserve." James Earl Reed, June 20, 2008, electrocution. Reed murdered the parents of his ex-girlfriend in their home. While in prison for assaulting her, Reed wrote threatening letters to Rigo, his ex-girlfriend. After his release, he purchased a gun and hitchhiked to the Lafayette's home, searching for Rigo. Although he was supposed to be traveling on a bus to a federal halfway house program, Reed instead went to the Adams Run home of Joseph and Barbara Lafayette in 1994. When the couple refused to provide information about their daughter's whereabouts, Reed killed them. During his 1996 trial, Reed acted as his own lawyer. He denied committing the murders, even though he had confessed to the police, and 3 witnesses testified that they saw him coming out of the Lafayette's home after the shootings. Police discovered in Reed's bag a diagram of the Lafayette's home, as well as tennis shoes of the same make as the shoe prints found in the yard. The jury deliberated for just 30 minutes before convicting him. He had no last words and no last meal. Reed, aged 49, became the first individual in the U.S. to be executed by electric chair in nearly a year and marked South Carolina's first execution by this method since 2004. Joseph Martin Luther Gardner, December 5, 2008, lethal injection. Melissa Ann McLaughlin, 25, was brutally essayed, tortured, and shot 5 times in the face before being left to die by the side of a road. Gardner and several accomplices had made a New Year's resolution to essay and kill a white woman, claiming it was in retribution for 400 years of oppression. McLaughlin had left a nightclub after an argument with her fiancé and initially received a ride home from police, but later she set out on foot to go to another club. 3 men, Matthew Carl Mack, Matthew Williams, and Joseph Gardner, approached her in a car and struck up a conversation, ultimately luring her to the trailer where they lived. There, she was essayed by the 3 men, and word was sent throughout the trailer park that they had captured a white woman, prompting 3 additional men to participate in the assault. 2 black women, girlfriends of some of the men, were present in another room, but they did nothing to stop the attack. The man subjected McLaughlin to further humiliation and torture, soaking her in bleach and hydrogen peroxide and scrubbing her with a nylon brush, including forcing her to scrub her own private areas. She was handcuffed, blindfolded, and had a heavy coat placed over her head. The man then transported her in a car, forcing her onto the floorboards in the back. During the drive, McLaughlin managed to free herself from the handcuffs and struggled. Joseph Gardner, seated in the front passenger seat, held her head down and shot her twice in the face. The driver then pulled over 14 miles outside Charleston, where Gardner fired 3 more times in the face and once in the arm before leaving her body by the roadside. Gardner, who was missing from the Navy at the time, evaded capture for nearly 2 years. The sentences for those involved were as follows. Joseph Martin Luther Gardner was sentenced to death. Matthew Carl Mack received life in prison with eligibility for parole in 30 years. Matthew Paul Williams also received life with parole eligibility in 30 years. Danny Dwayne McCall received 6 years. Roger Williams received 5 years. Edna Lee Jenkins received 7 years, suspended for time served, and Indira Simmons received 7 years, also suspended for time served. Gardner refused a special final meal. His last statement was a written one. I would like to apologize to the family and loved ones of Melissa McLaughlin for taking her from them and causing them so much pain. I was 22 years old then and I am 38 now. While I have always been sorry for what I did, the passage of time has allowed me to mature, reflect, and experience spiritual growth in ways that were foreign to me as a young man. I have repented for what I have done, and I am very grateful to the many people who have prayed with me and for me over the years and in my final days. I deeply regret that my actions deprived Miss Laughlin of the chance to marry, have children, and experience life with God. I have spent years praying for her, and I encourage all people of faith to do the same. Luke Williams, February 20, 2009, lethal injection. The bodies of Williams' wife, Linda, and their 12-year-old son, Sean, were discovered in the family van just over the state line into South Carolina. The van had been driven into a tree in what appeared to be a poorly staged accident, and both bodies had been doused with gasoline and set on fire. Autopsy reports revealed that Linda had been beaten to death while Sean had been strangled. Investigators later discovered that Williams had secretly taken out life insurance policies on his wife and child just weeks before their deaths with a combined payout of $500,000. He was the sole beneficiary. At the time, Williams was unemployed and had a history of relying on insurance settlements from prior injuries and accidents. He was out of money and had recently filed for bankruptcy protection. In the days leading up to her death, Linda had contacted United Way's helpline and was referred to a shelter for battered women. The shelter's phone number, written on a torn slip of paper, was still found in her purse when her body was recovered from the burned-out van. Williams had a last meal of fried chicken, steak, baked potato with sour cream and butter, a tossed salad, cranberry sauce, peach cobbler, fried turkey, and ketchup. He had no last words. Thomas Treshawn Ivy, May 8, 2009, lethal injection. Ivy and Vincent Newman escaped from a jail in Alabama where Ivy was being held on a murder charge. After stealing a truck, they drove to South Carolina, ultimately arriving in Newman's hometown of Columbia. There, they kidnapped businessman Robert Montgomery, who was working downtown, and drove him to a rural area in Orangeburg County. According to Newman's testimony, while there, Ivy shot Montgomery in the head and chest, leaving his body to be later found by hunters. 2 days after the murder, the pair went to a mall in Orangeburg where a clerk accused them of attempting to pass a stolen check. Officer Tommy Harrison responded but allowed Ivy to leave when he realized Newman was the one trying to use the check. Ivy claimed that a handgun in his pocket accidentally discharged as he walked away, the bullet ricocheting off the floor and striking Harrison in the leg. Panicked, Ivy then shot the officer 5 more times. Newman later testified against Ivy and was given a life sentence for murder in South Carolina. Ivy's last meal was pizza and donuts. He didn't have any last words. Jeffrey Brian Motz, May 6, 2011, lethal injection. Motz was initially serving a life sentence for the 1995 stabbing deaths of his great-aunt, 73-year-old Era Austin, and great-uncle, 79-year-old Clyde Canby, during a robbery. His sentence was later elevated to death in 2005 after he fatally stabbed his cellmate, 26-year-old Charles Martin. Martin had been serving time for an aggravated assault charge and was only months away from his scheduled release at the time of the attack. Mott's last meal was pizza, fried fish, popcorn shrimp, French fries, cherry cheesecake, and sweet tea. His final statement was read by his attorney as he lay on the gurney. In it, he apologized to the families of his victims and his own family. He also used the statement to warn children about the dangers of drugs, which he said destroyed his life. He waived all of his appeals and chose to be executed. His was the first execution in South Carolina in 2 years and the first to use a new drug, pentobarbital, in the lethal injection protocol. Freddie Eugene Owens, September 20, 2024, lethal injection. Owens was convicted of the 1997 murder of Irene Granger Graves, a convenience store clerk. At the time, Owens was 19 years old and committed the crime alongside an 18-year-old accomplice during a robbery. This happened back in November of 1997. The accomplice later pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter and was given a lighter sentence, while Owens was found guilty of murder and received a death sentence in 1999. His death sentence was overturned twice, but subsequent resentencing trials reinstated it, and the higher courts upheld the decision. In addition, Owens was also charged with the 1999 murder of Christopher Brian Lee, a fellow prisoner. On September 20, 2024, 46-year-old Owens was executed by lethal injection at Broad River Correctional Institution. He chose not to give a formal final statement, though he said bye to his attorney. At around 6:45 p.m., he was administered a single dose of pentobarbital and was pronounced dead at 6:55 p.m. Owens became the first person to be executed in South Carolina since 2011. His last meal was 2 cheeseburgers, some French fries, a well-done ribeye steak, 6 chicken wings, and 2 strawberry sodas, as well as a slice of apple pie. Richard Bernard Moore, November 1, 2024, lethal injection. He was convicted of the September 1999 murder of James Mahoney, a convenience store clerk in Spartanburg, South Carolina. Initially, in 2022, Moore had selected the firing squad as his preferred method of execution, but by 2024 he chose lethal injection instead. At his trial, Moore claimed that he shot Mahoney in self-defense after Mahoney drew a gun. Moore had entered the store unarmed and taken the gun from Mahoney, with his lawyers arguing that since he had not brought a weapon into the store, he had no intent to kill when he entered. His last meal was a steak cooked medium, fried catfish and shrimp, scalloped potatoes, green peas, broccoli with cheese, sweet potato pie, German chocolate cake, and grape juice. His final statement was read by his lawyer shortly after the execution. Moore did not make a verbal statement from the death chamber. His last words included an apology to the family of his victim, James Mahoney. I am deeply sorry for the pain and sorrow I caused you all. To my children and granddaughters, I love you and I am so proud of you. Thank you for the joy you have brought to my life. To all of my family and friends, new and old, thank you for your love and support. Marion Bauman Jr., January 31, 2025, lethal injection. On February 17, 2001, the charred body of 21-year-old Candy Lewis Martin was discovered inside the trunk of her burned car in Dorchester County, South Carolina. The day prior, 20-year-old Marion Bauman Jr., a longtime resident of Branchville, South Carolina, was with his sister when he encountered Martin and her friends. Bauman, who had recently been released from both prison and the boot camp program after serving a 2-year jail sentence and a 30-day term for 2 counts of third-degree burglary and petty larceny in the late 1990s, reportedly asked his sister to stop the car so he could speak with Martin, whom he had known since high school. According to his sister, Bauman demanded that Martin return some money to him, and when she told him to wait until she finished her conversation, he allegedly said, "That bitch be dead by dark." That evening, Candy Lewis Martin drove up to a house where Marion Bauman Jr. and his friends had been drinking. Bauman, along with his cousin James Tywon Gadsden, got into her car and they drove to a remote location that Bauman had indicated. According to Gadsden, Bauman told him he intended to kill Martin as they exited the vehicle. While following behind her, Bauman pulled out a gun and fired 3 shots. Martin reportedly rushed toward him, pleading for her life and explaining that she had a child to care for. Ignoring her pleas, Bauman fired twice more, fatally shooting her. He then dragged her body into the nearby woods. After the murder, Bauman threatened Gadsden to keep silent about the killing, despite having previously boasted about it to others, including Hiram Johnson. Bauman drove Martin's car back to town and unsuccessfully attempted to sell it at a club. Ultimately, he spent the evening driving around with others. Later, he enlisted the help of another friend, Travis Felder, to return the car to the murder site. Bauman retrieved Martin's body from the forest and placed it in the trunk before setting the car on fire. While the car burned, Bauman admitted to Felder that he had killed Martin, after which both men fled the scene. Travis Felder was sentenced to 3 years in prison, which was suspended in favor of 3 years of probation for being an accessory after the fact of murder. James Gadsden received a 20-year prison sentence. Bauman's last meal was fried shrimp, fish and oysters, chicken wings and tenders, onion rings, banana pudding, German chocolate cake, pineapple juice, and cranberry juice. Bauman, who maintained his innocence until his execution, did not have a final verbal statement in the death chamber. Instead, a written statement and a poem he had authored were released to the public shortly before his death. His last written statement addressed his innocence, the victims' families, and the nature of those on death row. I did not kill Candy Martin. I'm innocent of the crimes I'm here to die for. He expressed hope that his death would bring them peace and allow them to focus on good memories. He argued that death row inmates are often portrayed as monsters, but are in reality kind, caring, loving people. Brad Keith Sigmund, March 7, 2025, firing squad. Sigmund was executed for the brutal murders of his ex-girlfriend's parents, David and Gladys Lark, in South Carolina. On April 27, 2001, just a week after breaking up with his former girlfriend, Sigmund attacked the couple, aged 62 and 59, bludgeoning them to death with a baseball bat. He was convicted for these killings and sentenced to death. On March 7, 2025, Sigmund was executed by firing squad, marking the first use of this method in nearly 15 years since Ronnie Lee Gardner, and he became the oldest person ever executed in the state. The execution was carried out at 6:05 p.m. by a group of volunteer prison employees. Sigmund, strapped to a chair with a hood over his head and the target placed on his chest, flexed his arms and heaved briefly before falling motionless. He was pronounced dead at 6:08 p.m. with a basin positioned beneath the chair to catch his blood. Witnesses noted that there was no warning or countdown before the squad fired. Despite his jaw being held in place with a sling, Sigmund appeared to mouth to his lawyer that he was okay. A journalist described seeing a jagged red spot about the size of a small fist where he had been shot and observed Sigmund's chest move 2 or 3 times following the rifle fire, with no other sound apart from the rifle cracks. Sigmund's last meal was fried chicken from KFC, green beans, mashed potatoes with gravy, biscuits, cheesecake, and sweet tea. In his final statement, he expressed his opposition to the death penalty, arguing that it was unjustified under the New Testament for him to pay with his life for the murders of David and Gladys Lark. He stated that since they were no longer living under the Old Testament, no one had the authority to take lives except for God. Michael Dean Mahdi, April 11, 2025, firing squad. Over the course of 3 days in July 2004, Mahdi, who at the time was living in Virginia, embarked on a violent crime spree that spanned multiple states, committing a series of serious offenses including carjacking, armed robbery, and 3 separate murders, 2 of which eventually led to criminal convictions. The first known murder involved a man in Brunswick County, Virginia. The killing occurred after a drug transaction went wrong. Mahdi later confessed to his crime, although he was never formally prosecuted for it due to the later murder cases that became the focus of his trials. Following this incident, Mahdi traveled across state lines, ultimately committing the murder of 29-year-old Christopher Jason Boggs, a convenience store clerk in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, on July 15, 2004. This crime was carried out during a robbery. Just 2 days later, Mahdi continued his spree by carjacking a man in Columbia, South Carolina, seizing the victim's vehicle to facilitate his continued flight. He then traveled to a farm located in Calhoun County, South Carolina, where he committed another murder. This time, the victim was 56-year-old James Myers, an off-duty police officer. Following the killing, Mahdi doused Myers' body with diesel fuel and set it on fire, further demonstrating the extreme violence of his actions. After the murder of Officer Myers, Mahdi remained on the run for approximately 4 days. His flight came to an end on July 21, 2004, when law enforcement apprehended him in Florida. He was then extradited back to South Carolina to face charges specifically related to the fatal shooting of Myers. Mahdi was tried, convicted of murder, and received a death sentence in 2006. Following his South Carolina trial, Mahdi was extradited to North Carolina for his role in the murder of Christopher Jason Boggs. In this case, he was sentenced in 2011 to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Ultimately, after exhausting appeals and legal procedures, Mahdi was executed by firing squad on April 11, 2025. The squad opened fire at 6:01 p.m., and according to a media witness present at the execution, Mahdi cried out immediately upon being struck by the first bullets. During the initial 45 seconds after the shots were fired, he could be seen flexing his arms and groaning twice. He continued to make several gasping motions for approximately 80 seconds before finally falling motionless. An attending physician officially pronounced Mahdi dead at 6:05 p.m., less than 4 minutes after the squad had discharged their rifles. Following the execution, an autopsy was conducted on Mahdi's body. The examination revealed that of the 3 bullets fired by the firing squad, only 2 actually struck him, and neither of these bullets hit his heart. Medical experts noted that this accounted for why Mahdi cried out upon being shot and why he remained conscious for over a minute after the initial impact. Mahdi did not deliver any final statement prior to his execution. For his last meal, he requested and was served a ribeye steak cooked medium, accompanied by mushroom risotto, broccoli, collard greens, cheesecake, and sweet tea. Stephen Christopher Stanko, June 13, 2025, lethal injection. Stanko reportedly started performing library research for a second book around a year after being freed from prison. He became friends with librarian Laura Ling while conducting his research, and he eventually moved in with her and her boyfriend. Additionally, he had formed an apparently cordial bond with Henry Turner, a library member. Stanko killed Henry Lee Turner, 74, essayed and cut the neck of Laura Ling's teenage daughter, who survived and called 911 for assistance, then strangled Ling, 43. Following trials in which the defense of insanity was raised, he was found guilty of these counts. Investigators discovered numerous articles on notorious serial killers, including Jeffrey Dahmer and Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer, in Stanko's home. A police spokesperson remarked on these findings, stating he either was just interested in serial killers or he was becoming one. His last meal was fried fish, fried shrimp, crab cakes, a baked potato, carrots, fried okra, cherry pie, banana pudding, and sweet tea. Stanko's lawyer read a long final statement appealing to the surviving victim and the victim's families for their forgiveness. Stephen Corey Bryant, November 14, 2025, firing squad. He was found guilty for the 2004 shooting deaths of 3 individuals in Sumter County, South Carolina. Over the course of 8 days in October 2004, Bryant carried out 4 different shootings, taking the lives of 3 people and leaving a 4th victim gravely wounded. The first person killed was Clifton Dale Gainey, someone Bryant knew, whom he shot and left on the side of the road. The second victim, Willard Irving Tijan Jr., was shot inside his own home during a robbery. The final victim, Christopher Burgess, was gunned down and abandoned on a secluded rural road after crossing paths with Bryant at a convenience store. Bryant was executed by firing squad at the Broad River Correctional Institution, and the procedure started at 6:02 p.m. A physician officially pronounced him dead just 3 minutes later at 6:05 p.m. Bryant became the 3rd individual in South Carolina to be executed using this method. For his final meal, he requested a spicy mixed seafood stir-fry, fried fish served over rice, egg rolls, stuffed shrimp, 2 candy bars, and a slice of German chocolate cake. He chose not to give any last words. Please hit that subscribe button if you like my channel. See you next time. Bye bye.